Russia's Prime Minister Vladimir Putin has declared victory in the country's presidential election. Speaking at a victory rally in Moscow a short time ago, Mr. Putin said it was an open and fair election.
But opposition leaders and Russian observers say there were widespread election violations.
We will not recognise the president as legitimate president of all Russians, and we didn't recognise Duma, which doesn't represent political views and doesn't represent people of Russia. That's why just we have a different period of time. Tomorrow that new stage starts, and tomorrow will start other wave of protests against what's going on in the country, and we will demand early elections.
That was Mikhail Kazhinov, who was Vladimir Putin's first Prime Minister, who later went into opposition. Our Moscow correspondent Norman Hermant joins us now via webcam for more. Norman, good morning. These allegations of fraud and violations haven't stopped Vladimir Putin from organising a victory rally where he addressed a crowd of his supporters a very short time ago.
That's right. He appeared before tens of thousands of supporters. We were down there a little bit earlier in the evening as the crowd was really building. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of those people are there for a curious reason. It's actually a rally organized by the Nashi youth group that is a pro-Kremlin group that's intended to sort of rally support for Mr. Putin. Interestingly, if anyone was looking for him to extend a branch of sort of reconciliation with these huge opposition protests we've seen over the last few months, he made a reference in his speech that the campaign had to overcome the provocations, referring to some of those demonstrations, and that those provocations were intended to only undermine the Russian state. So it doesn't sound as if he's immediately turning over a new leaf in terms of reform.
At the same time as this victory rally, as we're seeing now, was taking place, those claims of electoral fraud were intensifying, with lots of opposition supporters claiming Putin supporters were undertaking what they described as carousel voting. How does that work?
Well, carousel voting apparently has been raised to entirely new heights in this election, and that is when a large group of people are brought into an area, they're taken to one poll, they vote at that polling station, and then they simply move to another polling station and vote somewhere else, often taking the names of people who haven't showed up to vote. It's done with the alleged cooperation of the people running the polling station, and that way votes for Vladimir Putin can be recorded up. But amidst all these opposition charges, I think it's important to note, Michael, that the result tonight really does closely match opinion polls that we've been seeing for a couple of weeks now, including opinion polls from respected independent polling centers. So I think we were at one of these monitoring organizations today. They didn't deny that perhaps Vladimir Putin would get over 50% of the vote, but perhaps maybe that figure has been padded by, say, 10 or 12%. But there's no question that the number we're at now, which is above 60%, does match what we've seen for the last few weeks in opinion polls.
OK, so there is a bedrock of support for Vladimir Putin, according to those opinion polls. What's his appeal to people, Norman? Why has he swayed so many people to vote him in yet again as Russia's president?
Well, the first thing we have to remember, Michael, especially when we get out of Moscow, is that a huge amount of this economy is reliant directly on the state. The state has a lot to do with whether people make a living, whether they have jobs, and people who work in those companies, oftentimes they're strongly encouraged to vote for a particular candidate, but often they honestly feel that their best interest rests with Vladimir Putin. The other thing that's important to point out is that the four candidates running against Mr. Putin, three of them have run for president before and really do not have a very good record of energizing voters. The fourth candidate they're running, the only new one in the field this time around, Mikhail Prokhorov, a billionaire, many people were suspicious of his motives for getting in the race, perhaps thinking he was in some way connected or close to the Kremlin. So the field that Mr. Putin was running against really was not very impressive. The huge opposition rallies that we've seen, none of those leaders were permitted to run for president. They were kept out by administrative rules and by the Central Election Commission. So the leaders who could have really captured the public imagination weren't in this contest.
And finally, despite all of these claims of electoral fraud, is there anything opposition leaders can do about those? Is there any mechanism, official mechanism, to investigate those claims?
Well, there is an official mechanism. There's the court system in Russia, which I think it's fair to say does not often come up with decisions that are against the government interests. So the court system here does not have a lot of credibility. I don't think people will really think there is much of opportunity there to overturn this result. The opposition says its next best approach is to try to apply pressure, and we're going to see that in the next few days. There's an opposition rally planned for the center of the city tomorrow, and we'll see what happens, whether they can keep this momentum going now that the presidential election is over.
Norman Hermant speaking to us via webcam from Moscow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.